Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be digging into values. We're going to be talking about values. What are values, why we need them, and what's actually going on in culture. Hi, Nick. We're in the war room down under because values are being questioned all over the world, and in Australia as well, of course. Just this week, we've seen the potential overturning of Roe v. Wade. In the US, it's big news. It's big news.
It's enormous news, and I think obviously very exciting for a lot of people who for decades now have been wanting to see that overturned. It probably could overstate it in one sense, because it doesn't mean that abortion is now suddenly illegal in the United States, of course. All the individual states will be making their own decisions.
It'll devolve to the states.
But it means that they are able to make those decisions, and it's back in the hands of the legislators, the people we vote for.
Well, we're talking about values. I mean, this is the one to lead with, because a decision like Roe v. Wade is a presentation of more conservative values, and it's outraged the left, of course. I mean, everything outrages the left. But Chuck Schumer, our friend Chuck, he said it would be an abomination. Interesting choice of words, an abomination if this precedent was overturned. But what's more incredible, he said, our children will have even less rights than their parents. When you hear that, and we'll put the quote up, our children, what about the babies that are being murdered?
It's amazing cognitive dissonance. I must admit, I've never understood, because with abortion, for me, that is a very clear-cut issue. But I'm amazed that you see such vehement outrage on the other side.
And the irony, just doesn't see the irony. Our children will have less rights.
Surely it's the side that doesn't want to kill unborn children that has the right to feel outraged and feel like an abomination. That babies being dismembered in the womb, that's the abomination.
Rights in the past 50 years, not just on women, but on all Americans. Under this decision, our children will have less rights than their parents. The Republican-appointed justices' reported votes to overturn Roe v. Wade will go down as an abomination, one of the worst, most damaging decisions in modern history.
Such a sharp and confronting topic, and it's, they've barricaded the Supreme Court. That it was leaked. Why was it leaked? Well, the left has got it and they're running with it.
Leaks always go favourably in one direction.
Yeah, they do, and it's such a hot topic. But Babylon Bee took the opportunity.
That's right. When I heard what Chuck Schumer said, he made Babylon Bee's headlines. They had a couple of hilarious headlines. The left now have to drive several hours in order to commit murder.
And are horrified that more babies might be born. The left will be
horrified that more babies might be born.
Something like that.
Then Chuck Schumer makes his statements, and you're like, well, that's beyond satire. I mean,
well, the thing about Babylon Bee, just to land on that for a moment, people say, it's a satire side, but actually what's going on there, they're using satire to really make a point, a value point. Like they're confronting the culture and saying, you'll be outraged that more babies will be born, and people go, that's funny. No, it's not funny. It's actually true. And there's Chuck Schumer saying that the children will have less rights than their parents. Well, not for the ones in the womb or about to be aborted. So this is really
the humour of it lands because it's genuinely absurd. I mean, it's
sometimes it's hard to tell between, like the last year in Victoria, it was hard to tell between satire and reality. It was just so absurd.
Yeah, it's happening increasingly.
Yeah,
some of the great satirists who've been working and mocking left-wing ideology over the last several decades have increasingly been saying, we're trying hard to keep up with reality.
Yeah.
It's getting really difficult.
It's making it hard for them.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually becoming more and more pertinent as a tool, satire as a tool. And so that's what's going on in the States, and that's really going to be very, very intense. I don't know what the time frame is, but what they will do is they'll false flag it and say that the people that try to overturn a la January 6th, they'll do that sort of stuff, and they'll use every tool and every weapon to actually try and frustrate and overturn.
We know how filthy that kind of politics around their Supreme Court decisions can get in the United States. Just in the nominations that happened during Trump's period. The most filthy politics you can imagine. So I think it's not going to be pretty.
No, it's not.
But on the whole, it's good news. And I would recommend people actually go and read Justice Samuel Alito's, what he's written. The thing that got leaked was really well-written expression of why the original decision didn't really make a whole lot of sense, and why it's right that it should not be treated as a precedent, but democratic principles this is the other thing that's the dissonance. You know, it's always those on the other side saying they're trying to protect democracy by maintaining this.
Yeah.
Democratic principle says the people you vote for reflect your values, and that means they shouldn't be overridden by a court. If you vote for someone who says that they are going to oppose abortion,
Yeah.
that's because that's your democratic expression of your values, and you want to be able to vote for someone who believes that and not have them overturned by.
And this is the point of our session today. You know, that the values
Yeah.
are imbued in government policy. They're imbued in culture. Judeo-Christian values underpin our justice system, our government system, our culture. You know, I mean, it's everywhere, right? And there are people who are determined. I mean, him calling this an abomination is a biblical term, and he's obviously trying to echo the gravity from his point of view with that language. But there is an attack on values across. I mean, the culture wars, we talked about it last time.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's actually an attack on values, and this is what people. You know, I think you were saying that the atheist position is not value free. It's actually, you know, it has its own set of values.
That's right. I think that, you know, we have this old principle called separation of church versus state, which really originally was just about separating the institutions of church and state. But it's become so diluted, and I feel like people are so poorly educated in civics in Australia,
and civics,
culture, so they don't know a lot about it. But you cannot separate values and your underlying worldview from the decisions that you make in every aspect of life. So while you can have church and state as institutions separate, you can't separate religion and governance and politics.
This is the important point that you know, when people of faith say, oh, well, we shouldn't be involved in politics, it's part the word politics, because that's really a career or a mechanism, a process, if you like, whereas governance and government is what we absolutely should be involved in, because everything goes down in that sphere. I mean, that's where the decisions are framed, that's where they're taken, that's where the policies are framed, that's where the direction is set. And we've, you know, people of faith and Judeo-Christian values right across the spectrum have been sold the story, retreat, shut up, you're not welcome here, and, you know, we don't want you forcing your values on us. But your point before, then it leaves a vacuum and other values arrive and present.
That's right. I mean, any time you make a decision of any kind,
everything,
that decision is informed by the things that you value. Literally, you have to value one thing more than another, the way that you prioritize. It's informed by your morals, your moral position on everything, your priorities, your underlying worldview, where you think we came from, what are we here for, what are we here to, all of that whole framework, which really rests on your theology, which says what is your God? What's your underlying...
Interesting that you use the word theology there, because what I think's going on is that there's an alternate theology that's emerging or has emerged, and that is being presented. And this story of we should be quiet conservatives, we should be retreating from the town square, we should not be presenting our views, is just so wrong on every count.
It's very wrong.
It's very wrong.
There's no such thing as a values vacuum, and that's what we're landing on here. There's no such thing as having no theology. Atheism is a theology.
Yes.
Agnosticism is a theology, because you cannot then, from that atheist position, go and make a decision without having a values judgment. And that's, I think, is demonstrated really well by the abortion issue, which is why it's so big. Because this idea of being pro-choice, I want everyone to have the freedom to make their own decisions. And here you talk about, would you be pro-choice on rape? Would you be pro-choice on murder? Would you be pro-choice on theft? Would you be pro-choice on...
You're trying to mess with my head.
Do you have... Of course not. All of those things are moral issues. And so being pro-choice on anything, you are actually making a moral judgment. And so you cannot keep your values out of your politics. And I think in the realm of politics, this isn't something that just touches those obviously moral decisions that that our politicians make, such as the issue of abortion, euthanasia, etc. But it also touches education. It touches your perspective on
Well,
history.
look at the. We'll stay with the states in education. They've got, I mean, that's been a massive battleground the last 12 months.
Yep.
With the critical race theory and the contest between state and families, and we could put up hundreds of quotes on that and clips where parents have got into got up against the school boards and said, stop trying to transition our children, stop trying to indoctrinate our children. That's not your role, right?
Yeah.
And there is a significant increase, I think in Australia, it varies state by state, but in Australia it's around the 20 to 23% mark, I believe, for homeschooling, growth in homeschooling. So what people are voting with their feet, they're saying, I don't want my children staying in this state system, because the state system is actually bringing values along with the education.
Right, it's a values framework, and it's certainly not a neutral one.
No, it's not.
It's actually a very invasive one. You could argue.
And the project in the state, there's 1619.
1619 was about rewriting U.S. history and essentially teaching U.S. history.
Well, why not?
A rubric.
Why not rewrite the history if it doesn't suit your ideology?
Yeah.
But I was listening to a podcast the other day between Max from Australia, who's got a bit of a rep, and an Irish guy. Try and drop it in here if we can. And they were saying, and these guys are not Christians, right? They're not church people. There's no churchianity going on here. They're saying the culture has become spiritually bankrupt.
This is an opportunity for the humanity to wake up, and those who don't wake up, well, they will be culled. That's just simply the way it is. And really, when you look at it, humanity's got to a point of what I've been calling spiritual bankruptcy. We really have, generally as a whole, whether we've been trained to be that way, whether it's because all these NPCs are really bio-robots with avatars running them and think they're human and they're not, whether they're all coded, whatever it is. The fact that they've gotten away with this, and so many people have gone along with it, and they've run out and got this jab, well, it's like we reached a state of level of spiritual bankruptcy and conscious oblivion that humanity was just given a choice. Well, either become human again or take the jab and die. Because
what many of us have been saying, it appears to be a spiritual battle. And,
it is a spiritual battle on every level, brother.
And I thought that was a really interesting term. So people are recognizing this vacuum, this void that's been created, and the church has left the town square. They're not speaking to it. They're fairly quiet, fairly passive, conservative. We're nice people. We don't get into fisticuffs. We don't barricade the Supreme Court. And we've been conditioned to be less and less vocal. And they're now saying, these guys are saying it's spiritual bankrupt. And people are actually they're picking up on their internal radar. So there's a problem, right?
Well, I think it's not unsurprising that our society should be increasingly spiritual bankrupt when, since the Victorian era, with the emergence of science as the fundamental tool used to understand everything, people don't believe in the spiritual. They actually, I guess in a practical everyday sense, people will, because we are actually spiritual.
Yeah.
We do actually have a spirit. We have a soul. But
that's been the shift since
the reality, but people don't have a cognitive framework for it at all, because people don't believe in the spiritual or the supernatural at all.
Well, that's happened, you could argue, and people do, from the mid-60s, from the hippies flower power thing.
Really said it.
And that's when the long march through the institution started, right? That was Saul Alinsky and the Frankfurt School effects came in, in the US. The whole thing started to play out. We're now 50 years down, right? We're 50.
And look what it did. Like in the 60s, that was really solidly the sexual revolution, which was taking out any underlying theological framework from things. Yeah. From sexual activity, from family.
It was removing boundaries. It was removing guidelines.
Exactly. It's saying we have a no boundaries basis.
Yeah.
But that becomes a moral framework
itself. It's an inverse moral framework. Yeah.
And you look at what's happening like in the universities these days, where someone who just propositions someone else who didn't want to be propositioned, and suddenly that person is accused of something equivalent to rape. They get hauled through the disciplinary process. They get kicked out of the university, and so you've got a culture that told you there's no boundaries, and now suddenly is creating a system where the boundaries are very tight, because the boundaries are every individual person subjectively sets the boundaries for all the people around them.
So you become your own God in
You
effect.
become your own God, and you start to impose dictums and fiats on all the people around you. And you combine that with critical theory, where it's, if you're an oppressed class, you have a right to do that. If you're an oppressor class, then you've just got to put up.
But we're all oppressed, we're all marginalised, we're all oppressed, we're all victims. And so there's this constant contest we talked about last time. And you know, I just thought that was really an interesting point, that spiritual bankruptcy, because I've never heard people so openly declare that, and they're sensing, and you know, when you talk to people, they're disillusioned with government, they're disillusioned with media, they're disillusioned with their employer, they're disillusioned across the spheres of culture. And so they now say, well, this isn't working for me anymore, I don't know what to believe in, I don't know what to trust in, I feel that like there's a vacuum, there's a bankruptcy, to use their term. And these guys are trying to imply and impose their own value set. And so we're talking values here, you know, and if we don't get engaged in the political process, government in particular, local levels, community levels, state and federal, then we're being silent, and there's no point in just praying 2 days after the election and go, well, come on, God, you know, like get us out of here. We've got to play a part, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. You've got to know your position is, and actually be involved. You know, we live in this world. We've got to.
Well, I know there's a lot of people praying. There's a lot of people getting active. It's really encouraged to see in the media, you know, community groups, freedom parties. It's starting to happen, and it really is starting to happen. It's very encouraging, and maybe we feel that there's something really now at stake. You know, our very freedom now. And I mean, this is the thing about the government. You know, if you step back, then the state becomes the government. So this is why it's an anomaly or something like that, where we say, well, church and state separate. Yeah, but the state becomes the God. So you're separating one to diminish one, so the other can be elevated, and the other one becomes the one who refines and defines the new sets of boundaries.
And it's that whole thing, if you can't have a values vacuum, ultimately, every time you make a decision, you have to have a values framework sitting under it. And so if you push increasingly all these different options off the table for what can be your underlying perspective, the only thing left is going to be hedonism, and the only instrument left is going to be the state. And that's really where we end up. And I think Christians must not accept that narrative that they have to keep their religion outside of their civic life, or that we have to keep our values away from the political sphere.
But not just Christians. I mean, conservatives, people with conservative values, which are typically Judeo-Christian, you know, conservative, respectful.
Well, in fact, everyone, absolutely everyone, shouldn't accept that narrative that they should push their moral
it's not just
away from their.
It's like, you know, I can steal from you if I'm marginalised and oppressed. That's now cool. Situational ethics, right? I can impose my medical view on you, right? And you lose your individual sovereignty. I mean, they're all value decisions. So this is the danger with the state becoming the God. And you know, there's a thing that you could argue that people are really looking for a saviour. They're looking for somebody to make their life better. They know that there's a vacuum. I mean, this is what I'm picking up, talking to people and listening and reading and researching. People are now the saviour complex, where they're saying, well, you know, Trump was a saviour, or Scott Morrison's a saviour, or, you know, Elon Musk is a saviour. I mean, somebody please save us. We have to, you know, we can't do that. It's not that simple, right? But we can't abdicate responsibility and hope somebody else will save us. We have to take responsibility. And this story that people with conservative Judeo-Christian values ought to shut up and get the heck out of the town square is just wrong, and it's got to stop. And it is stopping, and that's really encouraging. And one guy who knows a bit about that and has got a few thoughts is Dave Pello. So we'd like to bring Dave in on this very soon, because he's been in this space for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and he holds the Church and State Summit on an annual basis. The last one was in February.
So he knows him. We might know his stuff.
That's right. That's the topic he's passionate about.
Well, let's try and bring Dave in when we can get him shortly. In the meantime, on the Gold Coast, and this is in his geography, on the Gold Coast, there's a particular person there by the name of Sue Baines, has been appointed by the Mayor of the Gold Coast Council, and she's been put on his team of advisors. So she's on staff now, not full-time, but as a consultant, effectively, almost like a chaplain. And, why would he do that? Well, he wants righteous government. He wants those values being reflected in what they do in his patch.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. But just to show you how far we've come, 20, 30 years ago, we were talking about the mid-60s, that would have been, okay. Now there's a group of Satanists who travel down from the Sunshine Coast, north of Brisbane, down the coast. They made the trek, as leftists will do, and they're outraged. They didn't use the word abomination, but close to. They're outraged that this is happening, and we'll show you the clip in a moment. I mean, this is on main media, Channel 9, and so like, how dare the mayor of the Gold Coast look for spiritual guidance to execute sensible, wise, righteous government? How dare he? So this, when you see it, you go, what? So I'll have a look at that.
A battle between good and evil is brewing. The Temple of Satan is mobilising for a march on council chambers, vowing to summon back the demonic spirits cast out by Tom Tate's controversial spiritual aid.
Peeking through the windows of council chambers, Trevor and his devil-worshipping mates from Noosa aren't welcome. They're booking at council's new prayer room labelled a security risk and knocked back.
They will get to hell one day.
Police keeping watch, making sure the Satanists don't try any funny stuff.
Hail Lucifer.
They say they're being discriminated against. Their visit to the coast prompted by the mayor's new ratepayer-funded spiritual advisor, claiming she's driven the demonic spirits out of Evandale. So tomorrow, they're staging a protest, a ritual, where the group's leader, Brother Samael Demogorgon, will summon the devil back.
He will cast the appropriate spells and incantations to overcome what Sue Baines has done.
Tom Tate reckons they can go to hell, but to the Satanists, that's a compliment.
Considering some of the people that might be in heaven, I don't know, maybe. Might be more interesting.
Mackenzie Colohan, 9 Gold Coast News.
Okay, well that's an interesting shift in values over time on the Gold Coast, but it's happening everywhere. And what we're really seeing is, from the mid-60s, we're seeing a moral revolution. I mean, that's really what's going on.
That's right. So it's more than just a shift, and there's a great presentation about this that Albert Mohler did a few years ago, where he said, my brother recently showed me this, actually. So it's not just a drift in morals. We see drifts in morals at different times, but a moral revolution is when the things that were condemned are now celebrated, things that were celebrated are now condemned, and those who don't celebrate are condemned. And I think that's why what you were talking about earlier, that more and more people are waking up, more and more people are wanting to withdraw from the public education system, more and more people are wanting to find a leader, find some hero who's going to represent them, is because that moral revolution has gone so far. It's such a significant reversal, even over the space of just a few years, that a lot of people are saying, what's happening? Like,
well, there's a latent energy here. You're into energy. There's a latent energy here where the pendulum swings so far up.
Yeah.
There's a latency to come back, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think. That's what I believe we're starting to see in culture. Is that the pendulum has gone up like that, and perhaps this Roe v. Wade is actually a tipping point in a curious way, because it's almost like a spark for a fire, potentially, not just for civil unrest, but for a moral resurgence, and for this pendulum to come back. Because with this absurdity where satire meets reality, and this where someone can get up and say it's an abomination that children will have more rights than parents by getting murdered. So this is how extreme this has become, and these people are not, they're not thinking like we think. They are actually totally committed to their cause. So for us to be told to be quiet, to shoot through and be quiet, well, if we buy that, well, we sign our own death warrant. That's what happens.
Yeah, and I think that you make a really good point. I think that it can be a catalyst. Things like the Roe versus Wade, or whatever whatever that sparks in the public
Yes.
debate, and all the other things that we're alluding to, which have been seen, which are quite absurd, a biological male winning a swimming competition or things like that. That just, a lot of people go, hang on, what's happening here? They really do trigger something, because they give you a, the emperor's got no clothes moment. They really do just reveal what was underneath. Was corrupt, and you see that something becomes a problem whenever it's taken to extremes, and that's true of all the different political ideologies. Left, right, libertarian, any of them. You take them to extreme, they become a problem. Well, this is a social ideology, this hedonism, this humanism. You take it to an extreme, it becomes a problem.
There is a moment when it looks so ridiculous, and you go, "Well,
That's
that
right.
can't be right."
Yeah, and only the most correct ideology can be safely taken to an extreme, which, in my opinion, is the
Well,
Judeo-Christian ideology.
we're talking about borders, and in Ireland, they talked about taking in refugees from Ukraine, and they talked about, I think it was 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. Now it's uncapped. They're taking it. They've uncapped it, and the ethnic Irish are now saying basically, what's going on? We don't have housing. We've got 10,000 people without a home now. We don't have an economic base to support this. Why are our national leaders, who are of the Chuck Schumer brigade, saying Ireland will now have an uncapped refugee intake from it? It will swamp Ireland. It will actually destroy the cultural foundations. There'll be housing crisis. There'll be economic. They don't have the tax base for it. So this is the absurdity, right? So what value set is driving that decision? I mean, that's the value set is globalism, no respect for a national identity, and actually smashing the culture.
And also, in fact, wanting to destroy some of those fundamentals.
Correct. Subterfuge.
Which you can do by diffusion.
Well, it's an attack on the family as well. A lot of this is an attack on family values, hence the homeschooling thing. And there's a recent book out called War on the West by Douglas Murray, who is from the UK. He's got a number of books, Slow Death of Europe, for example. He's well regarded, good commentator, and he was talking with Jordan Peterson about his new book. And his thesis is that the war on the West is actually being conducted by the West. The Irish example is a perfect example. It's an attack by the West on the West. So this is he's picked up that kind of core thought. So that's his latest book. And commentators like that are saying, well, this is what's going on, folks. We better talk to it. We better be aware of it. I think this is the first point, is to be aware of it. Something, a bit of knowledge helps.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to what we were saying earlier, that the value system that you have impacts everything. It's not just going to impact the explicitly moral and justice-based decisions. It impacts, as we said, education. It impacts your approach to climate change.
Well, the allocation of resources. Allocation of resources. Who gets what? Why do they get it? When do they get it? How much do they get it? I mean, that's a value-based set of decisions.
Yeah.
So to say, well, we shouldn't be in government, if we're not in government representing our interests and values, who is?
That's right. And if it's not, if the person who is in charge is not adhering to a religious framework for his morality, where is he deriving it from? And you see all sorts of alternatives that get adopted. It might be that his framework for ideology is left-wing. Is actually the left-wing ideology of everyone being fundamentally equal, and taking that to the extreme, taking the equality notion.
Well, I was talking to somebody from who used to live in Romania and moved to Australia when they were very young, and for 37 years they had a communist regime, and that regime became God, in effect, and told the people what they could do, what they couldn't do, when they could do it. So the long march through the institutions, the end game of this is the state becomes God. So this is really the core point. The value sets that are embedded within that kind of ideology are the antithesis of a Judeo-Christian ideology, and they are in fact in contest. Right. So if I wanted to have a contest with you and I wanted to win, the first thing I would do is tell you to go away, and if you retreated, I win. So
And there's always likely to be some.
That's gotta
areas,
stop.
Of course, where you'll align. You won't disagree on every single
Yeah.
thing, but you're not aligning because you have the same foundation, and consequently you will diverge, especially when things are taken to an extreme. The thing I found interesting, look, about the Douglas Murray and the interview with Jordan Peterson, this book that he's written, of course, is that, you know, Douglas Murray's not a Christian. I don't know exactly what Jordan Peterson's position on religious issues is, because I get the impression he's shifted a bit over the last several years. But he's not bringing it from adhering to that theology. No. But he sees
common sense,
the value in having values.
Well, that's probably a good place to end, because, you know, seeing the values in having values is kind of that's a worldview, you know, and that's why we're talking about this stuff. That's why we're sharing this with people, because the first thing is to have the knowledge, and from the knowledge comes the power, and then becomes the activation of that and the engagement. And the core theme about church and state is that we have to engage. We have to engage in every sphere, and government is the number one sphere. Yeah. And for too long it's been no. We should be quiet. We'll let somebody else do this. It can't continue.
And don't be ashamed. Like, we're in a pluralistic society, but we ourselves represent our own values in that, and should do so strongly. And so don't believe that you have to walk around being neutral. You walk around with the values that you have that derive from the theology that you have. If you believe this world is created, is in the hands of its maker, you know, then you take that with you and you go, that affects what I think we should be doing about climate change, about passion and welfare, about everything. Yeah. You seek to understand your own values, and don't be ashamed of having them, and don't think that you have to have some obligation to be neutral just because you live in a democracy. You live in it, but you yourself, you stand on what you stand on.
So see the values in having values. Thanks for being with us.